Okay. For those of you that don't know, I am in my 40s. I'm clutching on to my 40s. Some of you have known me for a good long while, and others we've not known each other as long. But it wasn't so long ago that someone came into my office and saw that I wasn't wearing my glasses, and they said, "Oh, you're not wearing glasses." Now, a statement like that still feels unusual to me. Why? Because I've gone actually most of my life, the great majority of my life, without having to wear glasses. I made it well into my 40s without having to wear them. And funny thing is, everyone told me this along the way, that yeah, right around 40, you're gonna have to start wearing glasses. And like clockwork, in my 40s, I began wearing glasses, and I've been wearing them for a few years now. I first noticed I was gonna need glasses while I was working on the laptop, a laptop just like this one. I found that more and more I was squinting as I started to read my computer screen for the better part of the day. And my doctor gave me the warning. He said, it's inevitable. It's inevitable. Eventually, you're going to need a little help. And though I dreaded the day, once my prescription glasses arrived and I put them on while staring at the computer screen, I thought, hey, wow, this is clear. I started to feel pretty good about wearing glasses. And hey, I don't have to wear them all the time. I still don't have to wear them all the time. Which is why you'll catch me without them sometimes. I can see far just fine. And to be honest, in these days, when I have to wear this face covering, the mask, my glasses get fogged up. And I told my wife recently that I may have to get one of those chains that holds onto your glasses that you can dangle them, right here, because again, when I wear the glasses with my mask on, they fog up. I wear glasses so I can see clearly, near and far. But anyway. Once I started wearing glasses, I told myself, yeah, see, this isn't so bad. I like being able to see near and far now. It's not so bad. I can get used to this. So right around the time that I started wearing the glasses, my youngest son saw me for the first time wearing them, and he said to me, hey, nerd. Isn't that great? He later tried to back off his statement by qualifying that I looked like a cool nerd, but the damage had been done by this point, okay? Nevertheless, I didn't allow that to dissuade me. I still wear glasses, as you now can see, more often than not. And again, I don't have to wear them all the time, but I leave them on my face because when I take them off and try and put them in my pocket or something like that, the lenses get dirty and I can't stand having dirty lenses. So I just leave them on because I prefer, probably not unlike many of you, I prefer clarity to non-clarity. Clarity beats non-clarity every time, does it not? We're in a series entitled The Ministry of Jesus, what he did and what he said. And it's our objective not only to recount or recall the things that Jesus did and the things that he said, but try and understand the meaning behind his words and action. We've said a number of times in this study that the things that Jesus did, in particular, the miraculous things he did, he never did those actions just for the sake of showing off his power. He never did those actions just to get a wow out of the crowd. There was always meaning behind the things he did. There was always a message that he was communicating, most of the time to his disciples. And here's the interesting thing. This is what's so great about the Bible, is that there was meaning and significance for the people who were witnessing what he was doing and what he was saying in the moment, but also we can then take that message that he was speaking to people thousands of years ago, right? A couple thousand years ago, and we can apply it to our own lives all these years later. So this is what we're going to do today. We're going to read this account where Jesus heals a blind man, okay? And then we're going to try and figure out what the message behind his actions are. And then we'll see how it applies to us today as well, okay? So let's check out this account. This is an account also involving clarity of sight. We'll see we're not the only ones that prefer clarity to non-clarity. You can see what I'm talking about as we turn to Mark chapter 8. This is in the Gospel of Mark in the 8th chapter. You can turn in your own Bibles or follow along with me right here on this laptop. This is Mark chapter 8, verses 22 and following. Mark chapter 8, verses 22 and following. It says this. And they came to Bethsaida. And some people brought to him a blind man and begged him to touch him. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, do you see anything? He looked up and said, I see people, but they look like trees walking. Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, "Do not even enter the village." Now, the first time you read this, you might be a tad bothered by it, for a couple of reasons, actually. You might be bothered by the fact that Jesus uses spit to open his eyes. Why spit? Isn't that kind of gross? Yes, it is. And why does Jesus tell him to go home and don't even enter the village? What's that all about? Those are some peculiar details to this account. And again, if you're like me, sometimes you've read these accounts growing up, or you've read them even just for the first time, and you might blow through some of these details and not catch them, and you may even question why they're like that. But again, the detail that I find most peculiar of all is the fact that Jesus took what appears to be 2 tries to heal this man of his blindness, and that he uses spit on top of that. Okay, first of all, there isn't any other miraculous account that I can think of where Jesus takes 2 tries to perform the act. We'll talk about the spit in a second, but again, there are no other accounts where Jesus takes 2 tries. Can you imagine when Jesus turned water into wine, if when they gave the wine to the master of the feast, if when he tried it, if they asked him, "How is it?" What if he said, "Well, it's not so good, it's kind of sour." And then Jesus tries again, "Okay, how about that?" Right? Much better, it's fantastic. It would take something away from the miracle itself if it took him 2 tries, wouldn't it? Doesn't he have absolute power? Does he have absolute power over everything or not? Right? Well, admittedly, the word tries isn't the proper word here. The fact of the matter is Jesus healed this man in 2 stages. Think of it as 2 stages. It's not like Jesus tried and failed, so he tried again. It shouldn't surprise you to know that this was willful and deliberate on the part of Jesus. He deliberately healed this man in 2 stages. Could he have done it just once? But your sight is restored? Yes. But he chose to do this in 2 stages. Why would he do that? Okay? That's what we're really trying to figure out here. Why did he perform this miracle in 2 stages? And once we answer that, the question about the spit might make more sense. Okay? So let's read some of this again and start in verse 23, where it says this. Let's be reminded here what it says. It says, "And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked, 'Do you see anything?' And he looked up and said, 'I see people, but they look like trees walking.' Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes. His sight was restored, and saw everything clearly." Okay, now that's our mystery. He sees unclearly. He doesn't see at all. And then Jesus rubs the spit in his eyes, and he doesn't see clearly. He sees unclear. He sees shapes. He has a general perception, but it's not clear. Then Jesus touches him again. He sees clearly, crystal clear. Why did it take place in 2 stages? To answer that question, it may not surprise you that I'm going to say this. We're going to have to back out of our account and understand context. If you just listened to Scott preach a little bit ago, he made reference to the idea of context. If you don't understand in context, you're not going to understand. Context is everything. If you don't understand what the verses are going on around these verses are talking about, you're not going to understand the ones that you're looking at. What it's talking about, you won't understand any of it, or you'll have a very hard time understanding it. So let's look how our passage starts in verse 22. It says, "And they came to Bethsaida." Is there anything that we need to understand about Bethsaida? Is that an important detail? Of course it is. When I first moved to Nashville, I moved to this town without a job. I finished seminary, and as you might guess, seminary, you study the Bible. And my specific concentration focused on worship and how music and worship were used in the Bible. And when I graduated, though I had opportunities at the time to become a youth minister or a children's minister or a music minister, a couple of different choices, I decided that, well, I'm single, I have no children, I've always wanted to live in Nashville. I only have to make enough money to feed this mouth. I'm going to move to Nashville. I'm going to move to Nashville and figure out how to support myself once I get there. Now, part of the reason that I wanted to move to Nashville is because, as you all know, this is Music City, and I love music. I knew in particular this was a city that generated, especially at the time, a lot of Christian music. So here I am, fresh out of seminary. I have a master's degree that's centered around music and the Bible. Now, that should be just what the many, many Christian music companies around here would want, right? Not at all. Fortunately, even though I didn't find a job right away in the music industry. I managed to find a job with a temp agency. You know, again, in my mind, you know, those were just that. It wasn't a permanent job. Those were temporary jobs. Well, I found you know, I looked for the real job that I wanted to get. The real reason I was here in Nashville was to bestow upon the Christian music scene my vast knowledge and abilities. And I remember I took a day off from my temp job with a stack of resumes in hand, and I literally walked up and down Music Row, dropping off my resume door to door. Just trying to get a foot in the door, quite literally, proved to be a near impossible task. I got the addresses of all the music labels in town, and not only did I mail my resume to them, but I tried to visit them in person and drop off my resume. Because what was I trying to do? I was trying to show them my credentials. I was trying to show them why my credentials meant something to their business, okay? Door to door, face to face, one-on-one. I was aggressive. And guess how many job interviews I got as a result of doing that? This many, 0, not a single one, okay? Despite my credentials, they were not impressed, okay? Credentials are meant to prove something. Credentials are meant to show you, or to show anyone looking at them, that you are qualified, or they indicate achievement of some kind. If you have the right credentials, those serve as the proof positive that you are who you say you are. And in spite of the credentials that I had, it didn't do anything for me. My credentials didn't meet the needs of whatever it was they were looking for. They were looking for someone else with a different set of credentials to fill whatever needs they had. Now, eventually I did find a job in the music industry, but that was only because I had a friend who was a recording artist at the time, who literally walked me into the building and said, he vouched for me. He said, hey, you should hire this guy. And the next day I got a call, not because of the fancy things that I had on my resume, but because I walked in with somebody who had credentials more impressive than mine, whose credentials said, hey, listen to me, I know what I'm talking about, hire this guy. And so I was hired. Okay, now for Jesus, his credentials, in a sense, were his miracles. Yes, compassion for people was a motive for him to perform miracles, but even more than that was the fact that the miracles of Jesus were his credentials. They pointed to the fact that he was an agent of revelation. He wasn't just an ordinary person speaking, that he had something behind the things that he was claiming. He had the seal of approval from God. That he was there on his behalf. Do you remember Jesus' encounter with Nicodemus in John chapter 3? He seems to get the point when Nicodemus says to him, this is in John 3, verse 2, he said this. This man came to Jesus, and this is Nicodemus, this man came to Jesus by night and said to him, Rabbi, we know that you are a teacher come from God, for no one can do these signs that you do unless God is with him. Okay, so seeing that he was able to do these things affirmed the fact, at least in Nicodemus's mind, that Jesus was from God. He was the Son of God, or sent from God. Okay, so Nicodemus got it, but not everyone got it, in spite of his credentials. To some, Jesus's credentials meant nothing. A large portion of the miracles that Jesus performed, believe it or not, were in the city of Bethsaida. That's the verse, the city we read about a little bit ago when we started our scripture. Bethsaida had been witness to many of Jesus's signs. They were a witness to his credentials. Now listen to this. This is from Matthew 11:20. Matthew 11:20. What does it say? Matthew 11:20 says, then he began to denounce the cities where most of his mighty works had been done, because they did not repent. Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the mighty works done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. Okay? Then he goes down a little further to say, for if the mighty works had been done in Sodom, it would have remained until this day. So here's Jesus in the city of Bethsaida, a city Jesus doesn't seem to have a high opinion of when you read through the text, a city where he had credentials on display numerous times, and yet their hearts remained hardened. They closed the doors on him like an angry record label receptionist on Music Row. Trust me, I know what that's like. This seemed to be a theme throughout this region. And if we go back to the account that we're looking for today, back in Mark chapter 8, we started in verse 22 and look at what's going on earlier in the chapter. We have to go before it, so we have to back up before Mark 8:22. This is Mark 8:11 and following. Let's read this, Mark 8:11. What's going on just prior to our account? Mark 8:11. The Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking from him a sign from heaven to test him. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, "Why does this generation seek a sign? Truly, I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation." And he left them, got into the boat again, and went to the other side. Okay, the Pharisees were asking Jesus for a sign. And they wanted to see a miracle. And Jesus refused. Jesus said no. Why? Why wouldn't Jesus do that? Have you ever tried to pull an apology out of a child, and instead of getting an apology, you just get this sarcastic sorry, right? The words are there, but what's missing? The change of heart. Notice the Pharisees, they came to argue with him. They came looking for a fight, and they asked him for a sign. They came to him with doubt. They came to him seeking discord, and then they asked for a sign. Think about most everyone else who asked Jesus for a sign. Why did, for instance, the woman with the issue with blood, great account, we may end up looking at that in a couple of weeks. The woman with the issue of blood touched the hem of his robe. Why did she do that? Because she believed. She came to him in faith. This is not the spirit in which the Pharisees are asking for a sign. Show us a sign, Jesus. Show us what you got. That's essentially what they're saying. And Jesus says, nope. And he leaves the scene. They don't see. They're blind. They don't get it. Their eyes are shut. They see nothing. It's not a coincidence that we're approaching a miracle about Jesus restoring sight. The Pharisees are metaphorically blind, okay? And so here comes this blind man. Now, what's the next account that's immediately after this one in Mark? So we read the one about Jesus restoring the man who's blind. We read just prior to it where the Pharisees are saying, come on, Jesus, show us something. They're blind. What comes right after this? This is Mark 8:14 and following, right after Jesus left the scene with the Pharisees. So actually, it's still right before. So this is Mark 8:14 and following. What's this say? Leading up to our passage. Now, they had forgotten to bring bread, and they had one loaf with them in the boat. And he cautioned them, saying, watch out. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they began discussing with one another the fact they had no bread. Oh, these disciples. Okay, just so you know, and we'll read this in a second, the disciples had just seen Jesus feed 5,000 and 4,000 people. Two separate instances where Jesus miraculously provides bread. There was a little bread. Jesus made lots and lots of bread. Twice, okay? Everyone ate and they had leftovers. Now, here are the disciples. Jesus is trying to teach them something about the Pharisees. Beware of the Pharisees. And the disciples are fixated on the fact they don't have any bread. We have no bread. What are we going to do? Oh, no, there's no bread, right? You'd think by this point, they'd seen Jesus draw boatloads of fish out of the Sea of Galilee. They'd seen him feed the masses twice, and they can't get over the fact that they forgot bread. You'd think that they'd realize at some point, you know what? I think one way or another it's going to be okay. Let's listen to what the rabbi is saying. Now, listen to how Jesus responds to this. This is critical. This is critical to understand the intent of what Jesus is doing in the account that we're looking at today. This is verse 17 and following, okay? Verse 17 and following. Mark chapter 8. And Jesus, aware of this, said to them, why are you discussing the fact that you have no bread? Do you not perceive or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000? How many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said to him, 12. And then the 7 for the 4,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces did you take up? And they said to him, 7. And he said to them, do you not yet understand? Let me ask the same question that Jesus is asking a bit differently. He could have also said, do you not see clearly? Is it not yet crystal clear to you? And then some people bring a blind man to Jesus. Now, what this miracle details for us, once again, is not just a show of power from Jesus. Rather, this is a living, breathing object lesson. This is an object lesson for his disciples. It's as if Jesus is performing a real-life metaphor for his disciples. Here, you guys, this is you. You can't see. And he brings this, that's why he shows him the blind man. Now, what does he do first? Verse 23, it says, I'll read that for you. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. Jesus took the blind man by the hand so he could lead him away to a private place. This was unusual, okay? Almost every time Jesus healed someone, he did it fairly openly, not isolated from everyone else. He called him aside. He called this blind man aside. He called him out of the crowd, away from the masses. He pulled him aside for himself, for his purposes. He pulled him aside away from an unbelieving city. And then he spit in his eyes. Now, I told you I would tell you the significance of the spit. I promise I'm going to get to that, okay? But not yet. Hang in there with me. Watch what Jesus does here. He pulls him aside privately with his disciples. And let's read this again. Read this one more time. Verse middle of 23. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the village. No, that's what I just read before. And when he had spit on his eyes and laid his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see people, but they look like trees walking." In other words, what is he saying? Jesus is asking him, "Do you see anything?" And he answers, "Yes, I see, but I don't see clearly." Do you see where this is going? Yes, I see, but I don't see clearly. Remember, this is an object lesson for the disciples. Hey, disciples, you're with me every night and day. You've seen me doing some amazing things, have you not? You saw me feed 5,000 people, and you saw me feed 4,000 people. Do you see? Do you see who I am? And what might have their answer been? Yes, Jesus, we see you, but we don't see clearly. We see you, but we can't perceive. We know it means something, but we can't quite make it out. We see, but it's not clear. Oh, okay. So it's not quite clear for you. Verse 25. It says this. Then Jesus laid his hands on his eyes again, and he opened his eyes. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Okay, disciples, it's not quite clear for you now, but I'm going to open your eyes. I'm going to open your eyes, and you will see. You will see clearly. You'll get it. You'll realize who I am and why we're here and why I'm here, right? You're going to go from seeing not clearly to seeing clearly. You with me so far? Are you seeing how this is all beginning to unfold? Are you understanding the object lesson here? This is why Jesus took 2 tries, and I put that in quotes, to do his miracle. He did it in 2 stages for his disciples to show them, yes, you see now, but not clearly. Stage 1. Guess what? There's going to come a time when you do see clearly. Stage 2. How do you see me now? You know, a man who was blind. He asked him, "How do you see me now?" "I see clearly." "Yes, you do." Now for the great payoff. This act is an eye-opening experience, not just for the blind man, but for the disciples as well. After all the miracles they had seen him do, after Jesus' response to the Pharisees for their hardness of heart and curses that he pronounced in the cities that wouldn't believe for their spiritual blindness, then they see him open the eyes of a blind man. And now, for the disciples, something is starting to click. Their eyes started to open to who he was. And how do we know this? Let's read the verses that immediately follow this account. This is verse 27 and following. Just after our account, it says this. These once blind disciples, and Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. And on the way, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say that I am?" And they told him, "John the Baptist, and others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets." And he asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter answered him, "You are the Christ." Aha! What was not clear before is starting to get clear. Before, we might have perceived that you were sent from God, maybe that you were a prophet like John the Baptist or Elijah or something, but now we're starting to see you're not just a prophet. You are the Christ. You're the chosen one, the anointed one. You are the long-awaited Messiah. They went from not clear to starting to clear up. They're making out shapes. Now, like Jesus did with a blind man, he was blind. He couldn't see anything at all, okay? They could kind of see. Then after Jesus rubbed the spit in his eyes some more, he could see clearly. Now, what's it going to take the disciples to see clearly? That not only is he the Christ, but what it means to be the Christ. That he was there not to deliver them from Rome, but to save their souls. What would it take? When would the disciples see clearly? What would have to happen for them to see it? Humiliation. The humiliation of the cross. Why did Jesus use spit? I promise you, using spit wasn't a benign act. I read a few takes on this passage, and it has been suggested by some. In fact, I think I've even taught it this way before, but after reading through it more and just digging into it some more, it was suggested by many that some during this era used spit as a healing agent, rub a little spit into it, and so that's what Jesus was doing here. I promise you this wasn't the case for the Jew. Spit to the Jew, much like it is for you and me, like I said before, is kind of gross. For example, when Jesus was on trial before Caiaphas, he asked him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of God?" And here's how Jesus responded to him. What did he say? "Are you the Christ?" And Jesus said this. Jesus said to him, "You have said so. But I tell you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest tore his robes and said, "He has uttered blasphemy. What further witnesses do we need? You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment?" They answered, "He deserves death." Then they spit on his face and struck him. Let me tell you something. When they spat upon his face here, they weren't paying him compliments. They weren't trying to heal him. They were humiliating him. Now, are you starting to see the significance of the spit here? Why did Jesus use spit to heal the blind man? Could he have healed him without the spit? Of course he could have. But again, he's communicating something to his disciples. This is an object lesson. You can't see now, but you will. You will see clearly. You're only seeing part of it now, but you're going to see clearly. What's it going to take for you to see clearly? The humiliation. The humiliation of Christ, his crucifixion. That has to happen. People will spit upon him. Then you'll see the payoff. See how that all works together. So we can see the object lesson here that Jesus, again, in this miracle, if you only read this miracle, you'd walk away thinking, what in the world? What's going on? Why did it take him 2 tries? And why is he using spit? Because again, this is a real life metaphor, and he's showing his disciples, look, this is what it's going to take. You can't see now. You can't see. You can't even quite see clearly, but through the humiliation of Christ, the spit, then your eyes will be opened. Then you're going to see. Then you're going to then it's going to make sense to you. Okay? Now, what we said we would do is try and ask what this means for us. How do we apply something like that to us? What application? Is there any meaning in this miracle for us to take away? Is it the same thing? Yes, it is the same thing. Yes, sure, we understand that Jesus was the Christ. I think most of us understand that. We actually understand it, what it means that Jesus is the Christ, probably more than the disciples understood in this account in that moment. Peter's confessing that Jesus is the Christ. We know what that means more than Peter understands in that moment. We understand that he was the Messiah, that he was the long-awaited Messiah, that he was the deliverer, but we understand more than Peter what it exactly is that we've been delivered from. We see clearly now, okay? We see clearly, more so than the disciples. I may have told you this before. I have this lawnmower, and the lawnmower that I have, I got it a few years back, and I want to make sure. Okay, here we go. I'm going to, before I get onto this illustration, let me share this from Luke. This is also such a good miracle to study in terms of seeing. It's about the object of our faith and not the faith itself. It's exactly right. Jesus made no mention of the man's faith not being strong enough to make a miracle work. Instead, we see Jesus using miracles in yet another way to show more clearly who he is. That's right. It's always directing us toward a greater revelation of Jesus Christ himself. That's what every miracle is about, okay? So anyway, how do we apply that today to our own lives? And I was about to tell you, I have a lawnmower, and I bought this lawnmower a few years back. We still cut our own grass, right? My boys are actually responsible for cutting cutting our grass, because the kind of grass that we have, and that we have in our front yard and our backyard, it's a zoysia grass. I love it. It looks great in the backyard, in the front yard, in the backyard. The dogs are back there. It's not as nice, but we still, because it's that kind of grass, we still like to collect all the clippings of the grass. I want them to catch them in the grass catcher rather than just let them fly everywhere. So, because it's a grass that grows near the ground, so you want to catch all those clippings. So I bought this lawnmower, and it had a grass catcher to go with it. Now, when I got it, as is the case with many things, there was some assembly required. And so I put it all together, and then I went out and I tried to use it. It worked great, except for the fact that it didn't catch grass worth a flip, okay? Not only was it not catching the grass, but the tube that went to the grass catcher would just get all clogged up. Every time you use it, just ran it a few feet, it would get all clogged up. So I remember I was so perturbed at this thing. I couldn't believe that I just paid so much for this mower and put it back together, and put it all together, and now it doesn't work like it's supposed to. I was ready to load it back in the car and take it back to the store and tell them what a piece of garbage it was. But then I remembered, oh, wait a minute. I think it came with another blade. I wonder why they gave me an extra blade, right? I opened the box to the extra blade only to discover that it was shaped differently than the blade that I was using in the moment. I wonder if that's significant for any reason, I thought to myself. Spoiler alert, it was significant. It was the blade that you needed to use for catching grass. I put it on, guess what? It worked like a champ. You see, once I saw all the pieces of the puzzle, things made more sense. Of course, looking back in retrospect, of course, I should have paid more attention to the fact that there were two blades. Why would they give me a spare blade? Oh, how nice of them, right? Of course there's a second blade, because it serves a different purpose. At the end of the story, once I saw all the pieces, of course, it makes much more sense. I see things much clearer now. We don't see clearly. We see a lot. You and I, we don't see clearly. We see a lot, though. We know a lot. We still don't see totally clearly, though. For instance, I don't know why God allows us to have a pandemic to the point that many of his people can't even come to church. I don't know why God allows these things to persist. I don't know why God allowed evil to enter the world to begin with. I don't know the answer. I can guess. I can use the cues that Scripture tells me, but I don't know the answer to that with great clarity, okay? But this much I know, that Jesus gave a blind man sight, and he did it in 2 stages. The first stage revealed something, not everything, but the second stage revealed everything clearly. And he tells us the same thing. He tells us the very same thing after the fact. After we know of his resurrection, after we know of his humiliation and his resurrection, he tells us this. This is from 1 Corinthians 13:12. I love this verse. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. He tells us this just as he told his disciples. You don't see clearly now. You don't see everything crystal clear, not yet, but you will. You will know clearly, fully. Now you only know in part, then face to face, we shall know fully. And when we see him, when we behold his holiness clearly, I believe we'll be left without doubt and question. I believe we'll see clearly at that point. And for some, listen, I know that may not be a lot of assurance for right now. That may not be what we need to hear right now, but it's what we've got. It's a promise that tells us, yes, things don't appear clearly now, but one day he will undo all the evil that has been allowed to persist for so long. And then you and I will see clearly, face to face with our Creator. And what a day, what a day that will be. So that's a little bit about that miracle. That's why, as always, with Jesus's actions, his words, his miracles, there's just so much more there than meets the eye, because it's never about just showing power. It's never about, look what I can do. He's always communicating to us something. He was always communicating to us something in the moment. And that's what we have here. That right now we don't see clearly, not everything clearly, but we will. And in that day, what a day that will be when we get to see clearly the face of Jesus. So there you go. Before we are dismissed, I do want to pass along this word that we didn't get to talk about at the start. And that was Tom and Aaron, who most recently moved to St. Louis in light of Tom's illness. So he's going to be near family, but he did want to send to the group, thank you for all the help and support you so generously provided. It made our transition so much easier. Thank you for caring for the people in your community. Thank you for loving them well. And if there are no other things, please, if you have comments, please feel free to share them with me here on the chat, or tell me if you have something to say. I'd be glad to unmute you. Real quick, I want to tell you once again about what we're going to be doing. We still have a few more weeks to go in the summer, but what are we going to do in the fall? Well, we talked about this a little bit last week. We're going to be doing a bit of a grab bag. So if there's something specifically that you would like to be taught in this context here, I want you to send it to me. Said, you know what? There's this passage of scripture that's kind of unclear. Could you explain it? Or if it's an issue, maybe it's baptism, or maybe it's something else. Maybe it's, why do I hate my job so much? And what can I do about not hating my job so much? Some things like that. If there's something practical or biblical or whatever the case may be, we may not be able to get to all of them, but we want to start collecting some of them now. So if you have some questions that you want to send to me that we can cover in the fall, go ahead and start emailing those to me, and I'll be glad to compile a list. And that's what we'll do in the fall. Okay. And if there are no other things, I don't see anything else that's come to the chat. Once again, thank you for joining me today, and thank you for being a part of this group. Even though, again, it's an odd circumstance. I don't know how much longer we'll be doing these kinds of arrangements, but hey, let's hunker down for now and make the best of it. And send me your questions, okay? Thanks again. I hope you all have a great week, and I miss you, I love you, and look forward to seeing you whenever that may be. Take care.